Hello and welcome to the Getting There Show, where we speak with brilliant people and unpack the key influences and decisions that have helped them get to where they are today. You'll get the books, the mental models, the inspirations, and all the steps in their journey to help guide you on your own path. As Isaac Newton said, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." Today's giant is an awesome woman called Shazia Ginai, who after a degree in pharmaceutical science, started her career in the research arm of Procter & Gamble, working on brands like Max Factor and Hugo Boss, before landing a job at GHD, the hair care brand, where she rose to global head of insights, before moving to Neuro-Insight, a neuromarketing agency where she became CEO last year. We discuss a huge amount here, like how understanding the brain can help big brands get their message across with some real life examples, how to transition into a leadership role, the importance of diversity for business outcomes, and why some of the most interesting people in the world are researchers. As always, we make sure to include all of Shazia's toolkit and influences in the show notes, so as to maximize the chances that this show helps you get to where you want to get to. Shazia, welcome. How are you doing?
I'm great, thanks. How are you?
I'm pretty well. So whereabouts are you now?
I mean, like everyone, I'm kind of trapped inside the four walls of my home. I live in Surrey, so I'm in my flat in Staines. Converted's a strong word, but I basically turned the spare room in my flat into an office about back end of March, beginning of April, as soon as this lockdown malarkey started. That's where I live now all the time.
And how is your home office? Are you happy with it?
Do you know what? I ended up buying a desk, putting it together. It was a very quick process, got a chair. I mean, there's nothing anywhere that's particularly exciting. But do you know what? It gives me the space to work. And I'm one of those annoying people that tends to make a lot of mess when they work. I'm quite kind of chaotic, I guess, in my thinking sometimes. So there's often bits of paper with notes that I have these brainstorming moments on. So it often needs a bit of a tidy up. But I like to think that makes me in some way intelligent.
Oh, absolutely. I can see the plant is strategically positioned behind you, away from your flailing arms as well. So.
Yes. Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, there are plants. There's a lovely plant on my windowsill, but that's a bit further away.
Excellent. Great to have you on the show, Shazia. One of the first things that we like to do in these episodes is to find out a bit more about your journey so far. So it'd be great if you could provide a sort of potted history of your career path, because I think it's really interesting.
Okay, so I mean, I should start by saying that I'm not in any way an academic. So when I did my degree, I don't test well. I'm more of a learn by doing person. And so when I did my degree, it was tough. And I did pharmaceutical and cosmetic science. So I was convinced I was a chemist at heart. And during my degree, I got some great advice from one of my tutors. He said, you can't get a job without experience, and you can't get experience without a job. And this was a long time ago. So we had an internship program, and the degree was either 3 years or 4 years if you wanted an internship during the degree. So I opted for the internship. Best decision I ever made. So my third year, I worked for Procter & Gamble. And I went into P&G with an internship in a lab. So I was basically lab coat, safety goggles, and I was making liquid makeup in the lab. So I was doing a dimethicone replacement project for Max Factor. And I did that for about 6 months. My internship was a year. And then the P&G gods in Cincinnati, the decision makers, decided to kill the project. And so I got moved. Onto a completely different project, completely different area. And it just happened to be consumer research on Hugo Boss's new men's skincare line. So completely different. I was out of the lab. And what I realized was I was never really meant to be trapped inside a lab. I mean, I'm clearly an extrovert. I was never really meant to be on my own in a room. But what happened was I realized that my curiosity, which I've had since I was a child, could actually be put to good use. So I then got into this research gig. And when I graduated, I went straight back into the same job. So it was product and consumer research. And I did that for many years. So at P&G, I worked on the Hugo Boss men's skincare line. And then I went on to kind of more of a front-end innovation program in the perfume category. So thinking, blue sky thinking around innovation. And then on the Replay brand and again on the Hugo Boss brand for perfumes. And so 7 years went by at P&G and I loved it. It was a lot of research, understanding how people felt and what they thought of products and packaging. But then I wanted something a bit more commercial. So I left after 7 years. And funnily enough, people always ask me why I left. And I said it was just an opportunity. When I was there, they had a redundancy program where they basically said, look, we need to get rid of a ton of people. And they asked people if they wanted to volunteer. And I said, yeah, sure. Why not? With absolutely no clue of what I was going to do next. So I did, I took it. And then it was one of those, I don't know if you watch Friends. I'm sure everybody watches Friends. But there's that amazing moment when Chandler does the aptitude test to find out what it is he's meant to do with his life. And it turns out it's what he's always been doing. And it was a similar situation for me because I left. And then I was like exploring, what the different things were that I loved. And it turned out what I was always meant to do was what I was always doing. And that was consumer research. I've been fascinated by the human mind all my life, I guess. So then I went to GHD. I got called about a job there. It was a qual insight manager role. It's a bit more commercial, a bit more singular actually, because it was qualitative. But when I arrived, it turned out actually what they needed wasn't a qual insight manager. They just needed someone to build this insight world for them. So that's what happened there. I kind of hit the ground sprinting, I guess. There was no choice. You have to sink or swim in an environment like that. It was very different to P&G, which was a big old family, great company, lots of benefits. You've very well looked after. And then GHD was a lot more entrepreneurial. It was owned by a private equity firm. And so I went there and within a year, they promoted me to global head of insight. So I was a lot more responsible and recognized for building and leading the sort of strategic insight function for the whole company. And that included everything from the innovation programs all the way through to launch products and the market sort of sizing exercises after that. And I did that for 4 years. Very different to what I did previously and what I do now. I had 7 bosses in 4 years, very different environment to battle with. And then, I got to the end and I'm a bit of a hippie at times. And I kind of had my, okay, universe, I feel like my unfinished business is complete. I'm ready to go. And within a week of me even just putting that out there, I got called about 2 jobs. One was for Neuro-Insight. It was a head of business development role. So it was a sales job. I'm working for an agency and I'd always been client side. And the other was for a qualitative research agency that was founded out in Ireland. And when I got the call about both of these, the Neuro-Insight gig, I was kind of excited because it was a bit weird. It was almost the holy grail of research because you're measuring people's subconscious, which is everything when you're trying to understand a person. The other one, the qualitative one, they outwardly told me that they were looking to hire a woman because they didn't have enough women on their board. And that I needed to be okay with slightly crass misogynistic humour. And I just thought that was unbelievably ridiculous. Wow, what a tick box exercise. I'm of South Asian descent as well, which means that I tick a couple of boxes for people when it comes to diversity. But God, at least have the true and authentic agenda as opposed to just doing it as an exercise. So obviously I rejected that one. When I went through the process for Neuro-Insight and that's where I landed. And I've been there for 3.5 years. I came in as head of business development. I didn't have sales experience in the past, but it turns out sales is effectively being able to talk to people in a genuine way, being passionate about what you're talking to them about. And And I did that for a couple of years, and actually not even a couple of years. I hadn't even hit my 2-year anniversary when Heather Andrew, who was my predecessor, said, I'm ready to leave and I'm handing over the company to you. And I became CEO in June 2019, so last year. And my first full calendar year as the CEO happened to be the year of the pandemic. So it's been a baptism of fire. But yeah, that's been how it's gone so far.
Fascinating. Well, thanks very much for sharing that. And in terms of what Neuro does, it will be great to dig into that a bit more.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, the research world is a fascinating arm of kind of, I guess, marketing in general. And, you know, traditionally what you'd be doing is you'd be talking to people using qualitative techniques or surveying with quant or gathering big data, which is behavioral analysis of what people are actually doing. But neuro research goes a step further. So what we're measuring is electrical activity in the brain, which is the seat of all human decision making. It's where everything starts. And when you're a traditional researcher and you're constantly trying to unpick what people think and feel, this is like the pinnacle of what you can get. I mean, you can tell how much I love it, right? I honestly was just amazed that this even existed. But we specifically at Neuro-Insight, we have a patented technology that allows us to do that. So we're the only ones that use SST, or steady state topography, which is the kit that measures the electrical activity in the brain. I think most people who would do this kind of research would use EEG. So there are some competitors out there who use that, but EEG is what you'd get in a hospital. You get quite noisy data from it. But SST, it was created by an amazing neuroscience professor who's our founder. He's based out in Melbourne. And he was working on ADHD patients. You know, he created this tech because it gave cleaner data, and it just so happened that there's a marketing application for it. So that's what we use. And we work with a lot of brands and media owners. So we measure specifically areas of the brain that give us insight into how to optimize and construct and deconstruct marketing communication, or understand marketing and media contexts, or we can, you know, unpack how your website works. And we look specifically at what goes into your long-term memory. So we measure the signals that are going into the long-term memory encoding in the brain. And we also look at emotional responses, because all of our memories are colored by emotion. And anyone who has kids, or frankly, anyone who doesn't have kids, may have watched the Disney film Inside Out. I love that film. It's amazing. And not just because it's really well made, but it's a great lesson in mental health, which is a whole other subject. But they actually spoke to neuroscientists when they made that film, because the analogy is very true. All of our memories are colored by some kind of emotion. And so we measure not just memory, but also emotion, so that we get a big picture of what's going on. And that allows us to tell brands, you know, is information about your brand really going into someone's head? Is it going to drive real action? So you can measure purchase intent by asking someone in a survey, but that's a conscious recalled or conscious lied about sometimes, or assumed judgment. Whereas what we're measuring is, has that information really gone in, and is there going to be a good response off the back of it? Yeah, it's like magic.
Amazing. And I seem to remember you being featured in a documentary around, I think it was Sainsbury's, and research around their Christmas ad. Tell us more about that, because I think that will give the audience a real life example of the power of neuro marketing.
Yeah, so we've worked with Sainsbury's for many years now, and one of the things that we've done for them is tested and optimized their Christmas campaign, obviously it being a really critical time of year for any advertiser. And what they did is actually last year it was their 150th anniversary, so they were actually being filmed about Sainsbury's, and they very bravely had cameras following them around for the whole year. And then in December, they played this 6-part documentary on TV. Now, they rang us in about October, November time and said, oh, we need to test the Christmas campaign. I said, yep, sure, you know, as per normal. And they said, oh, we're sending a film crew. And I frantically did my hair and makeup on the day they were arriving. And they filmed the research being done. So they filmed the respondents coming in. sitting down, and then the people just basically sit and watch TV. When we're doing a TV ad test, we fit them with the headsets. They sit and watch telly. There's an ad break, and Sainsbury's filmed all of this. And then the following week, when we debriefed the results, very bravely, actually, they asked us to come in and debrief live in front of cameras. So they hadn't seen the data first. It could have been awful, but thankfully it wasn't, because they're pretty good at their jobs, right? So we went in and we debriefed it. And what we were able to show them, and this is a great kind of example of how this works well, is, the different moments at which they're trying to tell their story. And Christmas is a perfect time for that. Brains actually aren't interested in brands at all. They're interested in stories. It's how human beings make sense of the world around them. It's how we construct our reality. And so that's what we were able to do, to tell them, how's that story working for you? The exact moments and seconds it's working and not working. And we also, in that instance, spotted something we call conceptual closure. Now, this is an amazing phenomenon which has literally just been this year published by our founder, Richard Silberstein. So he's the professor of neuroscience in Melbourne. And conceptual closure is a moment where, because our brains are busy processing stories, they work like still cameras or video cameras. And so they take these little snapshots of the narrative that forms that story. And when you give your brain resolution of some sort, then your brain will go, oh, okay, I get this now. And it takes a processing pause to bundle together all those snapshots. Now, that bundling process is called conceptual closure. It's a processing pause, and it takes a couple of seconds. But during that time, your brain response really drops off. So you can't process things that are coming at you. I kind of liken this to when we're on PowerPoint and you hit the save button and that annoying blue wheel comes up on the screen. And it means that your computer's very busy, but you as the user can't do anything with it. Same principle. And what happens is, during that processing pause, if something really important like your branding comes in, it gets missed. Also, if your branding comes too close to that moment, the brain response can take quite a lot of time coming out of that moment, and therefore it's not really ready to engage as strongly. And so we were able to demonstrate to them that this is what's happening. And it was so interesting. It's because their story ended with the little boy running off camera, right? Running off camera signals an ending. If I said, okay, bye, and then hit the leave button on Zoom, you would assume that this is over, right? Same principle. We always think of our audiences as processing our ads as though, they're consciously aware and subconsciously aware even that to pay attention to every moment of this ad. But your brain is going to be taking in the story as though it's just happening, like any other moment in life. And so, we're able to demonstrate that to them. And that day was actually really funny when they aired the show, because we knew it was coming and we hadn't seen an edit of what, we'd presented to them or anything. And I sat down that evening and my whole team, we're all on messages kind of waiting for this to happen. And my phone starts going crazy. People I haven't spoken to for years were like, I think I just saw you on TV. So it was kind of a bit of a crazy time for us. But really great to work with them and great to showcase what we do in such an inventive way on their show.
Yeah. And so the moment of conceptual closure is a moment where you don't want to introduce key ideas, right? Because the user is switched off. So were you able to say to Sainsbury's, this is your moment of conceptual closure, don't put this message there?
Yeah, so what we do for brands is we'll show where stuff happened and we'll give them recommendations for edits, because we're not a creative agency, and I think creative agencies are phenomenal, and I've worked with some great ones. But creative agencies, and every agency is made up of conscious humans, and it's our job to be able to say, you do your amazing stuff, but we can tell you where the subconscious is going to pick up on certain things, and therefore here's kind of how you should do it. And that's what we do. We'll say that maybe change that frame slightly, maybe change that camera angle or the lighting or the music, those kinds of things. Yeah.
And I think the Christmas ads are ideal sort of environments to demonstrate, the power of what you do. I've watched all the Christmas ads this year, and I think Amazon's one with the ballerina is just phenomenal, because it tells a story.
Yeah.
And also it positions Amazon as being almost like the saviors of Christmas in this pandemic. I don't know what your views on the Christmas ads are.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting one because Amazon smashed it this year, right? I have a lot of issues with the fact that Jeff Bezos might be the first, trillionaire in the world during the year that so many people have lost lives and jobs. But when I look at the creative, I think that they did an amazing job. And it definitely comes up in conversation for me as one that they did well. This year in 2020, the year of the pandemic is probably what it's always going to be known as. Advertising took a real different approach, right? First of all, people couldn't shoot ads for a while when the lockdown went on. And what we saw was a lot of people coming out with, screenshots of Zoom. And we looked at the brain response to some of these when the lockdown ended, and it wasn't good. I mean, you need a story. And what Amazon did with that Christmas ad is they showed, but with the separateness, so they did the feeling of now, but with the desire of what we've always needed and always wanted. And human beings, we're wired to seek connection. That's part of, one of the big learnings of the subconscious. And I think everyone's conscious even this year, right? So they did that well.
We could talk about ads for a long time, but let's move on and talk a little bit about tips for people who want to get into the industry in which you work. So I'm guessing this is either insight roles or marketing roles. Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that insight as a space is so varied, which is great because it allows a diverse mix of people to want to get into it. I think it's not really well known. That's one of the biggest issues we have. And I sit on the MRS, that's the Market Research Society's Diversity and Inclusion Council. And one of the conversations we've been having is around hiring diverse talent. But, the fact that people don't even know this industry exists. So one of the tips, I mean, I think, channel your curiosity is one big one. Because in order to be a researcher, I firmly believe that you have to be a curious person. And I think, most people have that in them. In fact, I'd say all people have that in them to varying degrees. I don't necessarily think it's championed or celebrated in every home as a child. And I think that it's really important for us as adults to consciously kind of ask the question why. I think that really is important in this world. So that's one tip. I think a more practical tip is, there's a lot of trade press out there that sits within this industry. Things like Campaign or The Drum or Marketing Week or Research Live. Research Live is great. Impact Magazine. Do a little bit of reading around those sorts of publications because they provide, I mean, they're fascinating. There's so much going on out there that we don't realize in the research space. So there's actually quite a lot of information online that exists. And the other one, which is a little bit of a weird one, is people don't often know that there's a lot of research agencies that exist. And then you ask them, but you watch the news and there was all that polling data around the election. Where do you think that comes from? It comes from our industry. When the elections happen in the UK, there's a guy called Ben Page who's always on TV. He works for Ipsos, which is one of the big agencies. They do that polling. So there's quite a lot of the stimulus out there. And I think it's kind of like if you're looking for a yellow car, you'll see yellow cars everywhere, right? It's the same thing. It's about, when you open your eyes, you'll see a lot of that out there. But I do believe that curiosity is kind of key to that, and channeling it is really important. There's also a lot of very famous researchers, and people don't know that they're famous researchers. So people like Brené Brown, she's a researcher. Someone like Adam Grant, he's an organizational psychologist. Research is often something that people with psychology degrees do. And so, I think that there's a lot of those influencers out there who have a background in this space. And if you listen to their podcasts or their TED Talks and you go, wow, that's cool and really interesting, you're probably a bit of a researcher.
Got it.
I think it exists within most people in some way or another.
And what about your transition from being head of business development to CEO? It'll be brilliant to talk a bit about that too. How you've managed that transition.
Well, I mean, I honestly will say that anybody who wants to take the position of chief exec, you're never going to know everything. You're never going to be fully prepared. So I think one of the biggest sort of roadblocks to it is often that people think that they have to be a certain thing, and actually you don't. So my transition, I learned a lot from the person who was doing the job before me. I think my biggest kind of help actually was having a coach. So I believe that whatever age you are, whatever point you are in your career, you should have mentors, like throughout, from start to finish, even from university days, right? But a coach, I have a really good friend and he's an executive leadership coach. So I did a year's worth of coaching with him. And what he did was he didn't give me a list of things that I needed to be good at to be CEO. He helped me understand my potential in leadership. And I think a lot of people don't really realize that they have leadership skills. There's obviously certain things you need to be able to do in certain ways you need to be able to lead, but people have leadership skills and they're not always recognized. And having a coach, that helped me to unpack and bring some structure around how I think about my leadership style. And then the practicalities of the job, as I said, I don't test well. I'm not very academic. I learn by doing. So a lot of it was, get in and learn. And I've seen this a lot, and there is a gender difference in the way that this behavior exhibits itself. But some people will often just, they won't ask for help publicly, whereas I actively will go, okay, look, I don't know. Can people kind of give me some hints and tips here? And even if you've been in the position for 5 or 10 years versus you're just starting out, everyone has gaps in their knowledge because the world changes. So, I mean, having coaches and mentors is key. I think just constant learning, really important. And being CEO is interesting because you're everything to everyone. I was a researcher client side, and then I was sales in a research agency. And I've worked in, when I was at P&G, I'd had an R&D job. And then in GHD, it was under the marketing team. It was under the CMO. So I've done those things, but your HR, your finance, you're everything. And there's always holes in your knowledge, so learn and build a trusted team around you, who are really good, and enable them,
I think what's interesting as well in the media is when you read stories of chief executives and they kind of get profiled. There's a bias in the way that they want to position themselves. When you read their, a day in the life of a CEO will be, I wake up at 6 a.m, I journal, I meditate, I swim, I have smoothies, and then I work out, and then I have my first meeting at 9. And that creates a sort of artificial representation of what a CEO should be like, and it makes it quite difficult to not be superhuman. So it'd be good to find out your views on that.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think that it not only does it do what you've said, but it also makes a lot of people looking up at that position say, that's not for me.
Exactly, yeah.
Because it's actually not that appealing. Because who doesn't like sleep? Who doesn't like a lie-in? I mean, my perspective on this, and I was asked about this a while ago, the PR team I was working with at the time, they said, there's a marketing magazine that wants to do a profiling piece. And they sent me examples of previous ones, and they were exactly what you're saying. I wake up at 5, I go for a run. And I read it and I said to them, I said, look, that's not what I'm going to write. I just want to warn you now, you're about to get something a bit different from me. And, I just don't believe that everybody needs to be that way to do the job. And I also don't think that everyone is that way who does the job. I think it's kind of a bit of a fib. I mean, I'm not a morning person. I get the job done because I'm an evening person. So I don't, and there's the whole, you can't be what you can't see. I think that, for so many people looking at this, we have to break that down. And we also have to make it okay to be different, to lead. Diversity a lot. And, diversity is about, and inclusion, but diversity is not just about the physical attributes that make us different. It's also, they are the reasons that we have diversity of thought. So when you have a woman in the boardroom, she has a different life context. And that means that she will ultimately have a different, perspective, a different way of thinking about things. And it's the same in this, we need more people who don't just get up at 5 a.m. and have a smoothie. I like toast quite a lot in the morning. And it's not, bread's not good for anyone, right? Gluten's the devil. But I'm quite into rye bread. I like brunch. I'm a big fan of brunch. I do like smoothies. And I kind of got into smoothies in lockdown, actually. But, I don't go for a run first thing in the morning. I will do a bit of yoga from time to time, but that's because on top of being a CEO in the midst of a pandemic, I have a health condition called endometriosis, which I have to manage. Sort of is a chronic pain condition. So I'm kind of managing that at the same time. So my yoga helps. But again, you don't, to anyone listening, you don't have to do these things to be a CEO. There's a bunch of other stuff you need to be really good at. And, find a rhythm that works for you. I think that the reason that those profiles exist is because they showcase discipline. And discipline is important in the job. But I think the way that it manifests doesn't have to be in the same way as the way that it's being shown. And so, I feel like that's kind of where we're missing a trick. Yeah, go for a run at night, people.
and eat toast. So that's a nice segue into the next question, which is around the influences on your career journey. So can you identify a book which has had a big impact on your journey so far?
Anyone who asks me about books will know that I find that question quite difficult because I have too many books. I'm actually on a book buying ban at the moment because I've bought far too many books and my shelf's absolutely full. I've always been a big reader ever since I was a child. But I would say this is Mary Portas's book, Work Like a Woman. That book was... There's quite a large chunk of it which is about being a working mother as well, which I'm not. But what I loved about it is she is an incredible woman who went into this working world and really created a space of leadership, but also very entrepreneurial. I mean, she's incredible. She also has a podcast of the same name. And I loved the way she wrote. And also at that time, for her to take on the world the way that she did was phenomenal. And then the other one is Brené Brown's book, Dare to Lead. I'm actually quite a big fan of hers anyway. I think she's a phenomenal woman. She's a researcher, so most of what she talks about, I really enjoy. And she studies shame, and I believe that vulnerability is really core to leadership and to just life in general. And so that book, I felt, I've got it actually on the shelf, but I've also audiobooked it because it's really quite amazing listening to her read it. So they're the two I'd have to pick in a lineup.
Excellent. And what about a quote? Is there a particular saying or sort of maxim that you live by?
Do you know what? I think that this could not be more relevant than this year. It's actually a quote by Darwin. So the quote is, "It's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the most responsive to change." And I think that, that could not be more relevant for this year, for 2020, the year of being able to adapt to change. But just in general, as I said at GHD, I have had, 20 million bosses over the course of the time that I was there. It was a real changing environment. And also just working in a very small agency, you have to be agile. And I think that that's actually a really important trait for anyone. So yeah, I could pick so many quotes. There's a lot of feminist quotes in my life, but I'll pick that one for today.
Perfect. And he is, of course, a researcher too. So he fits in nicely to your other influences. And lastly, because this show is all about employability and career choices and people's work journeys, is there a particular interview question that you like asking? And once you've given us that, it would be good to find out how you yourself would answer that question.
Yeah, I mean, I've done a lot of podcasts, and actually I've been asked this before, but I also like asking other people. And I did a yoga retreat where we explored this area quite a lot. And it is, if you could go back in time, what would you tell your younger self? And I think the way I answer that is, just to believe in yourself a bit more. I think, I ended up getting into this position because I worked hard, but also because I met a lot of people who believed in me more than I believed in myself. And I think that having self-belief, and particularly, I see this a lot. I do a lot of sort of mentoring for young women, and I see this a lot. Women tend to, get to a point where they go, that's probably not going to happen for me. That's not the path that I'm meant to take. And there's a lot of preconditioned notions about what we are meant to do and who we are meant to be. And so I think, having a bit of courage to believe in yourself is really important.
Great. And that's a really nice way to end my questions. But we do have a couple of questions from our community. So
Great.
Marina has asked, how have the expectations of consumers towards brands changed during the pandemic? And then also, what tips do you have for those starting out in your industry?
Oh, cool. Okay, so consumer shifts in the pandemic. There's been quite a lot of resets, I think, just in terms of behavior and habit. But relationships to brands, I think in general, what we're seeing is people are looking at meaning and values more. Every brand will have some kind of brand equity document gathering dust somewhere that's got, a mission statement, a purpose, values, personalities, all that stuff. But it's time to live through those values now, because consumers are really looking at that. There's a lot more, let's support the small local brands, let's support people who have a social purpose as well, and who stand for something real, who have substance, not just style.
So it's a bit like what Burger King have done. So Burger King, I don't know if you saw their latest campaign, but they've given their kind of Instagram handle and Instagram posts to smaller companies, which I think is an amazing demonstration of support and solidarity.
There's been quite a few who have partnered with charities or are working with other organizations. Fenty is another really interesting brand, the cosmetics brand that Rihanna created. She done that because she wanted to create different shades of foundation for women of color, where we often find we can't find the right shade. But then on top of that, she recognized that she'd also had a bias and a barrier, and she now has transgender models in all of her campaigns and has made it non-binary what she's doing. So, I think that there's, consumers are really noticing these things, and that's the relationship that's shifted. It's about real values now. It's not just price promotions and all those kinds of things. Value is important.
Great.
And then the second question, which was around it was the tips for starting out in the industry. Yeah, okay. So I think that one is one that I wish I had known at the time, which is go to as many events and network as much as you can. I mean, I think you get told to network when you get older. And actually, you start when you're young.
Great. And then the last question is, based on your knowledge of neuroscience, what would your advice be to a small business to get cut through? So this is a question that's come from our community. It's a woman called Claire who runs her own e-commerce business.
Great. Okay. So based on neuroscience, I would say that the key is that the human brain is ultimately just seeking stories. So we've got some work that's been published actually, which is about ad communication, but the principles apply in communication in general. It was a project that we did on the drivers of creative effectiveness with ThinkBox. So if anybody wants to find it, just Google ThinkBox Neuro-Insight and it'll come up. And within that, storytelling is really key. So I think that is fundamental, and it's not just about making a story, it's about how you weave your brand into it without giving a hard sell, because I think a lot of brands kind of go, we need our brand out there, we need our product out there in people's faces, and we have kind of a built-in ad blocker in the human brain called the orbitofrontal cortex. It's actually it develops when you're a teenager, so when you're a kid it's not there. It's why we believe in Santa and stuff, and then as you get older it develops to help you assess risk. And it's also something that kind of is an ad blocker for us. It doesn't like the hard sell. So for brands starting out, tell great stories. And with communication, something like TV is super expensive to invest in, but social media is often the cheap and easy choice. Be mindful of what you're using in that respect, because something like Facebook, advertising is very intrusive on there. And we see that people mindlessly scroll and they're not actually enjoying seeing advertising on that content in their subconscious, even though the data will tell you it's had a number of eyeballs on it and you've had a certain quantified impact. What you need to understand is the quality of impact. And so something like Instagram is actually better. We've seen data on this, and influencer marketing is a really smart way to go. We did some great work on that too. So storytelling, and be mindful of where you communicate.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much, Shazia. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. And I'm sure lots of people will get a lot of value out of what you've said today. So thanks so much.
It's been a real pleasure. I hope everyone's really enjoyed it, and have a great Christmas break.
Thanks. Bye.